Hi, Finley.
Hi.
How are you?
Tired.
Tired?
You?
Why are you tired?
I don't know.
So, Finley and I have decided to do a YouTube page on some Bible stories that we are going to be doing through Shine APA. And this is kind of our practice. We kind of got talking about some different ways that we can practice this and what we can do with it. And we decided we're going to make a practice run with one of my favorite characters in the whole Bible. So let me ask you something, Finley. Have you ever heard of anyone that was born in sin, imputed, meaning he was found righteousness, God took care of that sin, took it away from him based on nothing that he did. He was then accused before the king, found faithful into the end, and was faithful all the way until not just a friend, but somebody that would eat dinner at the king just like his sons.
Me.
You! And that's right. And that is absolutely the story of us, and that's why I absolutely love the story of Mephibosheth.
Was he a chef?
No, he wasn't a chef. Mephibosheth was one of the sons of Jonathan way back in the time of Samuel. Yes, just like you, Sam. So this is the story primarily out of 2 Samuel, the story of Mephibosheth. So let's back up a little bit and talk about the name Mephibosheth, who he was and what he was. So he was mentioned primarily in 2 Samuel, but he was also mentioned some in Chronicles, 1 Chronicles 8 and chapter 8 and chapter 9. There he was called Nerith Baal, and Baal is kind of a word for God at the time. You know, there was the actual formal God Baal, but this is kind of more of just the God and the combination of shame. So basically, his name kind of meant shameful, God's shame, or the God's shameful person, because he had a pretty rough life. So let's talk a little bit about where we were in time with this. So first of all, this was during the time of King David. You know David, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
He killed Goliath.
He killed Goliath, exactly. So one of David's best friends was a guy named Jonathan. And Jonathan was one of the sons of Saul. You remember who Saul is?
He was blinded by God, and then he changed his name to Paul.
Close. Well before him, that was a different Saul. Good answer. But Saul was the king.
Oh,
the first
that
king.
Saul.
That Saul, yeah. He was the king before David. So this is at a time when David was a servant of Saul the king, and his best friend was a guy named Jonathan. Now fast forward about 20 years, and David is now the king. Now then, let's talk a little bit about what happened 3,000 years ago when a new king came on. Because the problem is when you're king, who gets to be the king after you die?
The prince.
The prince. Who's the prince?
It depends on who's the prince. Who's your child? Who's your son?
Who's your son? Exactly, it's your son. So if Saul was the king and Jonathan was his son, so who would normally be the next king?
Jonathan.
Jonathan. Or if Jonathan wasn't around, Jonathan's kids. And so what was very typical with this time is when a new king came and a new group, you would just kill everybody. Literally, the entire family of the king would be killed. That way, there's nobody else that years later they can come forward and say, I'm the king, I'm the rightful heir to King Saul, so therefore I should be king. Now, that's pretty serious stuff, right? So
Kind of scary.
it is kind of scary. So here we have a time when David has come to power, and what every other king in the world would have done at this time would have been gone and hunted down all of Saul's family and killed them. So let's see where we first see this son of Jonathan named Mephibosheth. And that is in 2 Samuel 4:4. This is specifically, whenever we talked about here, born in sin. Would you like to read a little verse for us here? This is Romans 5:12.
Therefore, just through one man, sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all sinned.
So basically, once again, Jonathan's sin, the reason that he was worthy of death was not because of anything that Jonathan did. It wasn't because of something that he did against David. It was simply because he was born and he was of the family line of Saul. And in 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 4, it says, "Now Jonathan, Saul's son, this is actually as soon as David took power. This is short after David took power. Now Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son crippled in his feet. He was 5 years old when the report of Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And it happened that in her hurry to flee, he fell and became lame. And his name was Mephibosheth." So, one thing you've got to remember here is when you read this, you kind of go, well, he was lame and then he fell. But that's an American way of telling a story. When you go look at the Easter way of telling a story, you talk about the most important things first. So you talk about Saul's son, he was crippled in his feet. And then you tell that story again about how it happened. So the way he was crippled, the way he was injured, was he was 5 years old and they were running from David because they were scared that David was going to kill them. It was a really good option that may happen. But they were running and his nurse dropped him and it broke his feet. So he was crippled in his feet. So here we have a guy who's crippled. He's not capable of even walking right, we found out later on. And he is the son of the former king. In everything.
So he's a prince.
He's a prince. But in every way possible, he is worthy of death. Because that's what the normal thing would do. The new king comes, you wipe out any competition. So here we have Mephibosheth, this 5-year-old boy who's crippled, people are worried about him. He's scared that people are going to hunt him down because of who he is. So, what do you think is going to happen? So, next we find in several years later. What are you doing?
Okay, draw him.
Okay, you can draw him. So, several years later, we find David is coming to power, and he's pretty well in the prime. He's no longer kind of buying for what's going to happen. He's in the prime of his power. And he says, sometimes after this is 2 Samuel 9, verse 1, sometimes after this, when David had subdued all the adversaries of Israel, he began to think of the family of Jonathan, who was his best friend that died whenever he came to power, and discovered that Mephibosheth was residing in the house of Malachar. Later, David helped him when he went to refuge in Lo-debar. Then he sent royal messengers and brought the infant son, Jonathan, to him. Now then, here's the funny thing, Finley. David lived in Jerusalem, right? Mm-hmm. So, do you know where Lo-debar was?
Lo-debar?
Lo-debar is where Mephibosheth was hanging out. So
was it like a bar?
It was definitely not a bar. It was a city. But it was a city that was about as far in the north as you could possibly get. It would be kind of like somebody who was scared of the president, but they didn't want to leave the U.S., so they moved to like Moose Jaw, Alaska. I mean, he's still in Israel.
As far away as possible.
As far away as possible. Because what's Mephibosheth scared of? If David finds out about him, he's going to kill him. Even though he is just a kid, he's just a way younger, and he's a crippled kid at that. But he has very real fear that David will kill him. But David says, go get him and bring him to me from Lo-debar. So he literally had gone as far away in Israel as he possibly could. And David comes and he brings him to himself, and he makes him he makes him like one of his sons. And he brings him in, he gives him his grandfather, the king. I mean, his grandfather was the king, so it's not a little bit of land. He gave him his grandfather's land, he gave him his grandfather's servants, and he basically took care of this boy for Jonathan's sake. Now then, we keep going on and we see what happens here. And where were we here? Yes, we get lost here sometimes. And so several years later, do you remember what other stories about David do you remember?
He killed Goliath.
He killed Goliath. Do you remember anything else?
He was anointed by Samuel.
He was anointed by Samuel.
He was made king.
He was made king.
He was chased by Saul.
He was chased by Saul. Do you know about Bathsheba?
What? Wait, was he like a sheep that took a lot of baths?
No, Bathsheba was a time that David sinned. And is part of, basically, it's a long story and what got there, but David's son actually kicked David out of Jerusalem and became king for a while.
So what?
It wasn't a good thing.
Konnichiwa.
It was a bad thing. But during this time, David fled from Israel, or fled from Jerusalem, and was hiding out.
Who's Fred?
Fled.
Oh, I thought you said Fred. I'm like, who's
He
Fred?
fled from Jerusalem, and in a lot of the faithful people of Israel came and followed him. Now, a lot of people followed his son and stayed in Israel, but that's supposed to be there.
Okay.
But what happened in 2 Samuel 16:4? Now remember, he is fleeing from Absalom. A lot of people have gone, and as he's fleeing, the servant of Mephibosheth meets him with donkeys and some food, and David says, "Hey, where's Mephibosheth?" It's a pretty good question, right? Well, what he says was in 2 Samuel 16:3, the king said, "Where is your master's son, Mephibosheth?" And Ziba, his servant, said, "Behold, he is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, 'Today the house of Israel would restore the kingdom of my father to me.'" So what Ziba is saying here is that Mephibosheth stayed in Israel and stayed in Jerusalem with the idea that he's going to be made king because he was King Saul's grandson.
Grandson.
His grandson. He was Jonathan's son. So, but does that sound like something that a righteous person would do? It wasn't.
It sounds like more like a trap.
Well, it was definitely not a good thing. Revelations 12:10 says,
Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation and power in the kingdom of our God and the authority of Christ has overcome his Christ have come for the accuser and of your brethren. That's what I'm looking for. Has been thrown down. He who accuses them before our God day and night."
So this is Satan in Revelation accuses us before God all the time.
It was on green.
Yes, I want it on green.
Okay.
So accuses us before God all the time. And here, Ziba accused Mephibosheth of sinning against David. So, now then, here's the question. Jerusalem, all the faithful people, except for one spy, that's a different story. All the faithful people of Jerusalem have been fled. They're all hanging out with David in the woods. Mephibosheth is still in Jerusalem. Do you think he's really sitting there and hoping that they make him king? Doesn't really make sense.
Everybody's like, this is a trap. Should I go? Should I not? Should I go? Should I not? Should I go?
Well, I don't think he was even debating. I think Absalom absolutely was going to make himself king. He was going to make Mephibosheth king. But what happens when a few months later David was able to come back and Absalom, his son that had revolted, had been killed?
Oh.
What do you think happened? David had defeated Absalom, and in 26, Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king, and he had neither cared for his feet, remember he's got gross, nasty feet,
Yeah.
trimmed his mustache, nor washed his clothes
Oh, he had a
from the day the king
mustache.
departed until he came home in peace. So I want you to think about this. Remember, this is a long time ago. So he's got nasty feet, and he's not been taking care of them. You know they stink. He's not trimmed his beard. He hasn't even taken a bath in months.
Can you meet up this guy named Bathsheba?
That's a different Bathsheba. It's when you get 10-year-old help here. So he has absolutely protested. His very appearance and his very smell knew he was in protest of what Absalom had done. So there was absolutely no doubt. Literally, Mephibosheth could not walk down the streets without people smelling his protest. He absolutely had shown and proven that he was faithful to the king. And so, once again, in 2 Samuel 19, he had found to be faithful to the king. Now, this is one thing that was a little bit weird about this, I will tell you, is that David, at this point, kind of did something a little bit rash, and I hope that he fixed it out later. He basically told Ziba, the servant that had lied to him.
Zebra?
Ziba. And Mephibosheth to basically split all his possessions.
So is Zeba a zebra named Zeba?
He's a servant.
Oh.
He's a servant. And so this is definitely one of the parts of the story, Mephibosheth, that is, well, it's difficult because Ziba had lied to David, and it was real evident that Mephibosheth was not against David. I mean, he literally had not bathed or taken care of his feet or his beard since he left. And so when David just divides everything, it's kind of one of these weird parts of the story that, well, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's what's in the Bible. It's what it explains. And that's one thing that I will say about anytime you read the Bible, there are always going to be things that just kind of don't always make a lot of sense. And what are you going to say about that? My thoughts is later on, David made it right. Hi, Sam. David made it right and restored Mephibosheth all of his land, and probably even punished Ziba or allowed Mephibosheth to punish Ziba.
Bad.
Bad Ziba.
No, it's
But
a zebra.
it doesn't ever talks about that. So,
Then how do we know it?
It looks like that's my assumption. We don't know it. That's kind of, like I say, and that's one of those, kind of those weird deals. It's like don't know.
That's like the pickle about stories.
Well, it's certainly the pickle of the Bible. I mean, it's one of those things, like I say, there's things here that
There's these
don't really make
stories,
sense.
And then the stories, they just kind of...
And there's some things that just kind of reading through them, you kind of make your own thoughts on these.
Yeah.
But you've got to stay within what the Bible says. So is that what happened? It's my assumption, but I don't really know. But he was found faithful. So he was born in sin. He was Saul's grandson. He should have been killed. He could have been killed. He had imputed righteousness. The King David took away any concern about that and gave him back all of his land, all of his possessions of the previous king. I mean, this is quite a bit of stuff that he just gave him from Lodi Bar all the way back down.
So is Lodi some kind of is it loaded with a whole bunch of like metal balls?
It's just the name of the city. I don't know.
Lodi Bar.
So he was accused before the king by Ziba, found righteousness to the end.
Yeah.
And then there was one other thing that happened. Now,
So what happened?
If you go back, there were some people called the Gibeonites.
Gibeah what though?
Gibeonites.
So are they like Gibeahs?
No, they were Gibeonites that were a people that lived in the land of Israel. And they were weak. They had made a deal way back, like several hundred years ago, with Jonathan in order to stay there. There was a story about, they got some old clothes and they got their horses and ran around with some old moldy bread and said, hey, we're from far away, be friends with us. Well, it was a lie, but they made the deal with it, so they stuck around. But the deal was, because they were now part of Israel and they worshiped God, they were safe, that you couldn't touch them. Well, Saul killed a bunch of them. Basically, he was mad because he couldn't go back and capture David, so he killed all these Gibeonites. They were weak. They didn't have a lot of power. He was basically bullying them. He was being a bully, but a bully that killed people. And so because of that, the Gibeonites came to David and said, because of what Saul did, we want blood. Blood. We want to kill the remaining family of Saul. And so what I want you to do is I want you to go round up all the family of Saul that's left, and we want to kill them. Now then.
Where's my last one? I need it.
That's pretty bad. That's pretty righteous stuff. Now then, where is the closest, easiest family of Saul to find? Mephibosheth. He's right there. Where's he eat dinner at night? At the king's table. So is David going to hand Mephibosheth over, even though he's promised to save him? He's promised whatever. And in 2 Samuel 21, verse 7, he says, but the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the oath which of the Lord that was between them, between David and Saul's son. So, in the end, what happens here? Read these two. It's Romans 8:1.
Therefore there is now no condemnation for those who are in Jesus Christ.
And then Romans 8:30.
It's 8:30 right now?
Right there.
Oh, 8:30. And these whom are predestined.
I know, keep reading.
I'm tired. And he also called. My brain can't do it. Gotta read it.
And those whom he called, he also justified. And those he justified, he also glorified. So here we have a man who he had worthy of death. According to all the laws of the land, he could and should be killed. But he was saved, and not just saved, but was given the full benefits of the king, the previous king's land, the previous king's servants. He was then accused before the king that had given him so much, but in the end found righteous. And then, once more, at the end, he was found faithful, and he was saved because of the promise of the king. Never because of anything that he did, never because of anything, the righteousness, the goodness that Mephibosheth did. He was saved because of a promise that king made, that King David. And it's just like you and me. We have been sinned in our life. We have sin in our life. Not because of any sin that we did, but because of what goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. But yet, God, the King himself, has saved us based on his promise. And his promise before we were even born. And so that we will be saved. And we will be accused. And we will mess up. And we will get accused by Satan to God himself. But in the end, we are going to be saved not because of any great thing we did, but because of the promise that king made. Just like here in Mephibosheth. And you want to see a really cool picture of this? So, where did Mephibosheth eat dinner?
The king's table.
At the king's table. And let me ask you this. Can you see Mephibosheth's feet at the king's table? Can you see my feet right now?
No.
When you're sitting at the table of the king, crippled feet or no crippled feet, you're Mephibosheth. And you have been elevated to not just some guy in Israel, but you've been elevated to right there as one of the sons of the king. And he lived out the rest of his life as a good friend of David and a good servant of David. And that is why Mephibosheth was not a chef, but he was one of my favorite stories in the Bible, a man that pictures our salvation and what God did for us. So, how would you describe Mephibosheth? Can you tell us the story? How would you tell as a 10-year-old?
I know, I'm a child. I would describe Mephibosheth as not a chef, but a human. born somewhere in the world.
Israel.
Israel. That's what I was looking for. I can't think of it. Cool guy. Almost died.
How come?
The king was dropped and crippled.
Yeah, it was dropped and crippled. Why?
Because his nurse dropped him.
Nurse dropped him. They're running away from the new king. There's some hints behind you.
He is also wanted.
Wanted, dead or alive. That's accurate. But was he ever killed?
Nope.
Nope. Why?
Because the king's promise.
The king's promise. And the king's promised us some things too, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
That's for the
That's one of them. All right. Well, this is going to be the first rendition. Like I say, Finley and I will be back, and we hope to do the Bible study lessons this week. And so be looking for a lesson once a week for, well, probably the next year or so.
And channel ideas, channel title ideas are welcome.
All right. Thank y'all. Bye-bye.